Bullets tore through the safe house in Mosul. American troops closed in on July 22, 2003. Uday and Qusay Hussein fired back. They died in the rubble. The American invasion finally ended a regime that lasted for decades. Before this shootout, the two brothers ruled the streets. Saddam sat far away in palaces. His sons brought daily terror right to the front doors of ordinary families. They were the direct local danger. Their father left them alone years before. Young Uday Hussein grew up while his father served time for Ba'ath Party activities. He was born on June 18, 1966. Saddam spent those critical early years locked away in a prison cell. The boy developed without boundaries. He expressed loud ambitions to study nuclear physics. He wanted to match the grand vision his father had for the nation. But his academic record remained stubbornly average. Instead of physics, he settled for Baghdad University. He enrolled to pursue a basic engineering degree. The campus was the largest educational institution in the country. Bodyguards cleared the crowded hallways for the young student every day. Classmates stepped aside and kept their eyes glued to the floor. The atmosphere around his daily routine reeked of unchecked privilege. No professor dared to give him a failing grade. Bloodlines simply mattered far more than actual knowledge or exam scores. His political rise bypassed all standard procedures. He needed zero practical qualifications to take control of major national institutions. At just 21 years old, the mediocre university student received his first major government appointment. He became the official chairman of the Iraqi Olympic Committee. The Olympic Committee offices quickly turned into torture chambers. One specific building became a national punishment site. A coach stood in the dirt courtyard. He had lost a major match. Uday gave a short command, and armed guards grabbed the man. They dragged his heavy body across the rough gravel for the rest of the team to see. The sharp crunch of stones against tearing skin echoed across the compound. Uday just watched the execution of his order. This same cruelty defined the whole organization. Uday founded the Al Rashid Sports Club. Joining was mandatory for the top competitors in the country. Refusing his invitation meant a jail sentence. Losing a game carried a much higher physical price. Guards used heavy concrete balls as a standard punishment for poor tournament results. Executioners dropped these heavy spheres directly onto athletes' legs. They whipped bare feet with thick cables until the soles split open. Training schedules turned into basic survival. 17 million people lived in Iraq during that decade. Out of that entire population, the best national athletes became the direct personal property of one unstable chairman. The main headquarters hid daily torment. Winning offered only a temporary break from the basement cells. Losing guaranteed physical mutilation. His daily moods shifted without any warning. A calm conversation often ended with a sudden beating on the floor. His unpredictable swings terrified everyone. Beyond the stadium walls, this unpredictable violence systematically targeted ordinary Iraqi families. On glossy magazine covers, he looked like a wealthy socialite. The reality was street thuggery. His black cars pulled up directly outside a crowded banquet hall, right in the middle of a wedding celebration. Inside the rented venue, the music abruptly stopped. A heavy silence fell over the gathered guests as armed men walked in. The guards grabbed the bride straight out of the crowd in her white wedding dress, dragged her out the door, and simply drove away. In a dense capital like Baghdad, which held a total population exceeding 4 million people, parents quickly realized that nobody was completely safe from his passing motorcades. They found no protection. Desperate families started organizing fake marriages to make their young daughters look legally unavailable to his scouts. Fathers pulled teenagers out of high schools and locked them tightly inside their homes. When staying in the city felt too risky, they loaded them into cars and smuggled them far away into rural villages. To evade these roaming hunting parties, young women often stayed trapped inside remote, dirt-floor farmhouses for 12 weeks. The terror reached far beyond the rural hideouts, crashing straight into a lavish party in the autumn of 1988. Music played and drinks flowed. Then the dull, heavy thuds of a club echoed across the room. Uday Hussein stood over a man, swinging the weapon. The victim, bleeding on the carpet, was Kamel Hana Jigio. He was not just a political rival or a random guest. He was Saddam Hussein's trusted bodyguard and personal food taster. Uday believed Jigio held too much influence over his father. The elite crowd watched in silence as the bodyguard died on the floor. Nobody dared to intervene. This public execution enraged the dictator. Uday's erratic behavior crossed a dangerous line, threatening the stability of the entire regime. Saddam ordered his own son imprisoned, though the sentence soon shifted to exile. Authorities deported Uday to Switzerland, placing him over 3,000 kilometers away from the presidential palaces in Baghdad. He caused trouble with local police in Geneva, but the punishment did not last. His mother pleaded with the dictator, and Saddam forgave him. Uday boarded a plane and flew right back to Iraq. Before his exile, he beat men to death with a club himself. By 1995, his personal cruelty gained official state backing. Uday established the Fedayeen Saddam. They wore pitch-black uniforms, heavy boots, and dark face masks. The distinct look was modeled directly after Darth Vader. They patrolled the dusty streets of Baghdad day and night. This militia turned his individual sadism into a fully funded street army. Public executions became a rigid weekly procedure. Men in black helmets arrived in open flatbed trucks. They dragged captives onto the hot pavement. Guards forced terrified local families into a wide viewing circle, demanding their full attention. The militia introduced heavy industrial tools to the public squares. The high-pitched whine of an electric construction drill echoed against the surrounding concrete buildings. Fedayeen members pressed the spinning metal bits directly into the skulls of blindfolded prisoners. They also applied chemical acid burns and high-voltage electric shocks. Torture stopped being a hidden police secret locked in basements. It became a daily, unavoidable spectacle for the Iraqi public. This organized violence quickly spilled over the national borders. Uday dispatched these black-clad assassination squads to hunt exiled dissidents abroad. They tracked down vocal critics across Europe and the neighboring Middle East nations. At its peak, the Fedayeen Saddam swelled to a massive force of 30 or 40,000 armed men. This entire paramilitary organization answered exclusively to one unpredictable man. Meanwhile, his younger brother spent his days quietly reorganizing the state intelligence services. Uday loved the spotlight and the blood. Qusay preferred the silence of a closed door. Born in 1967, Saddam Hussein's second son hid in the background. While his older brother beat people to death in public, Qusay quietly ran the state spy network. The real terror wasn't on the streets. It lived in a quiet office. The only sounds were rustling papers and the heavy thud of ink stamps hitting new arrest lists. Qusay took charge of the country's internal security forces in 1988. This quiet desk job destroyed thousands of lives. His father noticed this disciplined approach. Saddam saw a loyal manager, not a chaotic street thug. The dictator brought Qusay deeper into his tight inner circle. Saddam appointed him to new roles across the government. Water poured out of the ancient southern marshes through a network of newly dug artificial canals. This quiet administrative power eventually turned into a massive project of cultural erasure after the Gulf War in 1991. Before the government brought in the heavy machinery, the Mesopotamian wetlands covered up to 20,000 square kilometers. Then the water vanished. The mud baked under the sun until the dried clay cracked right where people had fished for centuries. He had taken over al-Qas, the special security organization, back in 1988, preferring to manage his crackdowns from behind a desk. When widespread uprisings flared up across the country following the Gulf War, his response meant rewriting the local geography. State excavators ripped through the dirt to build huge earthen dams, deliberately choking off the natural flow from the major rivers. Tens of thousands of people lost their homes because of one bureaucratic decision. His main targets were the Shia communities who had based their everyday lives around those flooded plains. They navigated narrow waterways in traditional reed boats and hunted in the thick vegetation, just as their grandfathers did. Qusay signed the paperwork that forced these families to grab their belongings and walk away into the blowing sand. The once vibrant ecosystem became a flat stretch of salt and dead vegetation. 1996. Wiping out the southern marshes proved Qusay's loyalty to the regime. Saddam rewarded him with total command over the entire Iraqi National Security Council. This position handed him the keys to the mukhabarat. The intelligence agency required a heavy, constant cash flow to maintain its grip on society. Under United Nations sanctions, the country officially had a ruined economy. But illegal oil trade still brought in billions of dollars across the borders every single year. Tanker trucks bypassed checkpoints to deliver crude oil to neighboring countries. Qusay funneled this underground revenue straight into the security apparatus. State enterprises and smuggled crude paid for a vast web of local informants. Neighbors watched neighbors in exchange for a small cut of the cash. Teachers reported on students, and shop owners kept tabs on their customers. The money bought quiet streets. It ensured fear trickled down into daily life. Qusay sat at the very center of this financial network. His quiet approach made him the clear heir to the presidency. By the late 90s, he controlled every shadow in the country. The state spent its hidden wealth preparing the ground for a coming conflict. The final deadline arrived in 2003. By early 2003, the brothers controlled every intelligence agency in the country, projecting an aura of untouchable power. A few weeks later, the coalition invasion stripped away their royal status entirely. It reduced the most feared men in Iraq to ink on cheap cardboard. Yesterday, their oversized portraits hung on every government building and street corner in Baghdad. The capital city held over 5 million people living under constant surveillance. Today, Uday and Qusay were just targets printed on a standard deck of playing cards. Qusay's calm, unsmiling face stared out from the ace of clubs. The military printing presses stamped exactly 55 specific faces onto thick paper stock, categorizing the remnants of the fallen government. Quartermasters handed out the freshly printed decks to infantry patrols deploying across the newly occupied cities. The stiff paper rustled in the dry wind. Soldiers flipped through the most wanted list, memorizing the features of the fleeing regime leaders. Uday received the Ace of Hearts designation, placing him right next to his younger brother. To speed up the nationwide manhunt, the United States military announced a massive financial bounty. They offered a $15 million reward for reliable information leading to either brother. This money turned the deep poverty and resentment of the local population into a hunting tool against the former elite. $15 million represented an impossible fortune for ordinary citizens trying to survive. Years of strict United Nations trade sanctions had ruined the Iraqi economy. The average monthly salary for a regular worker had dropped to just a handful of dollars over the previous decade. Military strategists calculated that the sheer weight of this money would guarantee a betrayal. Someone inside the country would eventually trade their former masters for a completely new life. American infantry units pushed deeper into the capital city. Two fugitives approached the Syrian border crossing without their usual armed escort. Dust settled on the dry asphalt behind them. While American infantry handed out playing cards in the conquered capital, the Ace of Hearts and the Ace of Clubs needed an immediate exit. They banked on an old political mechanic. Both Iraq and Syria operated under Ba'ath Party governments. The brothers expected Bashar al-Assad to honor these historical ties. They assumed their past status would guarantee safe asylum across the long 600-kilometer border. They were wrong. The reality of 2003 hit them hard. Syrian border guards stopped the brothers right at the checkpoint. The government in Damascus faced intense international pressure from the advancing invasion forces. Harboring two extremely wanted men carried heavy diplomatic consequences. The gates stayed shut. The border authorities issued a harsh refusal on the spot. Yesterday, Uday and Qusay controlled entire intelligence networks and ordered mass executions. Today, they stood at a closed border gate like ordinary displaced refugees. Their vast political leverage vanished in a single instant. This sudden rejection at the crossing would permanently cut off their paths to the outside world. The brothers remained trapped on Iraqi territory without a single route left for escape. Denied exit at the border crossing, Uday and Qusay drove north toward a city defined by a highly complicated ethnic structure. Nawaf al-Zaidan pulled open the heavy doors of his home to welcome the two most wanted fugitives in the country. They reached Mosul, a major hub in northern Iraq where Arabs and Kurds lived side by side. This was the second largest city in the nation, with a population approaching 2 million people. It provided a perfect human labyrinth for staying completely out of sight. The fleeing brothers now relied entirely on tribal loyalty rather than military protection. They met their distant relative in the courtyard and quickly stepped inside his sprawling private estate. Al-Zaidan was a longtime supporter of the ruling regime who willingly offered them a secure hiding place. The thick concrete walls of the mansion were heavily reinforced against potential attacks. This architectural choice directly reflected the constant paranoia that consumed the ruling elite over many years. Nobody from the inner circle ever trusted the outside world, so they built their ordinary houses like fortresses. The brothers walked through the reinforced entryway, and the heavy metal locks clicked shut on July 22nd. On July 22, 2003, American troops launched an operation to surround the Al-Hala district mansion after a tip. $15 million. In early July, the United States government placed that exact bounty on each brother. The cash instantly erased any safe harbor in Iraq. Nawaf al-Zaidan wanted the payout. He was the very man who owned the house. He gave Uday and Qusay shelter, locked the doors, and sold them out. Personal ties vanished. In a broken country, a host traded his guests for wealth. Al-Zaidan provided precise intelligence to the American commanders. He sketched out the entire floor plan of the property. He confirmed the targets were inside. The betrayal of one man triggered a massive military response. The 101st Airborne Division got the green light. Special Operations Forces loaded their gear. The soldiers moved into position. Once the perimeter around Nawaf al-Zaidan's property snapped shut, troops cut off every single escape route. Uday and Qusay Hussein dragged 14-year-old Mustafa straight into the crossfire. The adults and the teenager hauled weapons upstairs and barricaded themselves on the upper floor of the mansion. A normal residential home in Mosul's Al-Hala district instantly turned into a combat zone. The neighborhood was a dense grid of civilian houses. It was late July, and the heat pushed 45 degrees Celsius. Locals stayed completely out of sight behind locked doors. U.S. forces did not breach the property immediately, bringing in specialized gear instead. Amplified Arabic voices ripped through the quiet blocks. Loudspeakers blasted demands for a peaceful surrender, echoing off the surrounding brick walls of the residential street. The message repeated over and over, offering the brothers a chance to walk out alive. The response did not come in words. Uday and Qusay answered with heavy gunfire from the second-story windows. They utilized machine guns and threw grenades down at the street level. The brothers knew the exact layout of the property, moving between rooms to keep the troops guessing. The street fractured into a chaotic firefight. Mustafa fought right alongside the grown men. A 14-year-old boy dumped magazines into the advancing troops. The assault bogged down completely. The defenders held their high ground behind concrete, pinning down the soldiers below. The tight layout of the neighborhood made it hard to maneuver. The cost of pushing through the front door proved too high. Medics pulled casualties back to the line. The first direct push ended fast. The initial exchange left 4 American soldiers wounded. Those 4 wounded soldiers forced the American command to abandon light weapons and pull their infantry back. 10 TOW missiles launched from the mounted Humvees, flying straight into the residential facade. The BGM-71 TOW is a heavy anti-tank weapon carrying about 6 kilograms of high explosives. It was originally designed to penetrate thick armor, not ordinary domestic architecture. Fired from almost point-blank range, instead of their usual maximum distance of 3,000 meters, the rockets smashed into the upper floor. Whole sections of the house collapsed into the street, filling the neighborhood with a thick cloud of pulverized concrete. the heavy smell of crushed concrete mixed with the dark smoke from the ignited fires. Inside that burning upper floor, the remaining defenders refused to drop their weapons, despite the collapsing roof. Saddam's regime had raised its elite children in an environment where strict loyalty and a constant readiness for violence were just normal parts of growing up. 14-year-old Mustafa had absorbed this upbringing, showing the exact same stubbornness as his older relatives during the long standoff. He fired his weapon down at the troops, treating this suburban gunfight as the ultimate test of his lifelong training. The boy stayed right at his exposed firing position until the very end. One teenager with an assault rifle stood against 10 heavy anti-tank missiles. The resistance inside faded. When the dust settled and soldiers finally reached the ruined upper floor, they found no survivors. Over 20 bullet wounds. Uday and Qusay Hussein each absorbed massive incoming fire during the siege. Mustafa lay dead nearby in the concrete rubble. American troops pulled the bodies from the debris and transferred them to medical examiners. Military doctors immediately conducted thorough autopsies to confirm their identities. In 2003, Iraq held a population of roughly 25 million people. A simple official broadcast meant nothing. Citizens refused to believe the dictator's sons were actually dead. Fear still paralyzed the local streets. The military needed undeniable visual proof to convince the public, but the heavy firefight had severely disfigured both corpses. Specialists brought in mortician's putty to prepare them. They pressed the thick, heavy wax into the deep facial cavities. The dense material slowly filled the bullet holes. It smoothed over torn skin and reshaped their features for the cameras. The military then photographed the restored bodies from multiple angles. Commanders released these graphic images directly to the press. Wax-reconstructed faces appeared on the front pages of global newspapers.